Math taught in the right way is the key to successful learning, according to Charlie Stripp. He witnessed this firsthand right here in China. Stripp is the director of the National Center for Excellence in Teaching Mathematics, which is based in the UK. Charlie Stripp's life work has focused on advocacy of mathematics education at all levels. A teacher himself, Stripp also focused his career on teacher professional development. In 2014, he spearheaded a groundbreaking exchange program between teachers in England and China.
This is how the people that do this really well do it. So we should be doing that here.
I met Stripp in New York City at a conference on international math teaching hosted by the Forum for World Education. Tell me about your own educational journey, because it was really interesting just chatting with you that it's not something that was big in your family, I take it.
No. I was always encouraged at school, but my parents left school without any qualifications. My brother and sister left school when they were 16. I was the youngest, and when I was at school, my maths teacher actually sent a letter home to my mum and dad and said, you usually encourage your son to stay on at school because he's good at maths, and that kind of led to me, I suppose, completely changed my life really, because I might well have left school at age 16 and done a much less high profile job. Probably might have been much less rewarding, who can say, but education certainly has changed my life in a big way.
I saw a video where you said I'm generally a lazy guy or something to that effect, and that's why you got interested in maths. And that was interesting.
That's exactly right. Okay, and I think this has a big impact on what I think about maths teaching and how it should be taught. Is that what I realised about maths is that maths kind of makes sense, and so if you can learn and understand a few fundamental aspects, then actually you don't have to remember very much stuff. And that means that if you are relatively lazy, you can just, and I also enjoy problem solving. I think if you enjoy actually using the maths that you've got, then it doesn't feel like work either. So that's part of it. And I think that's how maths should be taught, as a connected structure that builds on itself all the time, and really maths makes sense. And lots of children that don't succeed in maths, they never realise that. They view it as a kind of ever-increasing set of instructions they've got to learn until they get overload. And it's because they haven't made those kind of connections in their understanding of mathematics. And I think that maths taught well, and what we've been talking about today with how maths is taught in Far Eastern jurisdictions, for example, that we're trying to emulate in England, that's what they do. They teach maths for deep understanding. And with that understanding and connections, it's much more enjoyable to learn, but it becomes a transferable skill that you can use and apply throughout your life. So it's a really big message that I think everyone should get.
Since 2014, more than 700 math teachers have participated in an exchange program between England and China. It has been deemed a success in both countries. It's so interesting, your journey, though, to China. If I remember correctly, you arrived there in 2014 to see what's going on in Shanghai. It's February. In November, you start this exchange, which to me seems extraordinary. I mean, if you're doing math, it's a very short period of time. Talk to us about what it was you saw there and how you came up with this idea.
Okay, well, first of all, when I went to Shanghai, I mean, something I said today is that I was concerned because I had some stereotypes about what I thought teaching would be like there, and I thought I kind of had very, very sort of wrong views about the idea it would be children having ideas drummed into them, and in a very kind of one-way traffic type style of teaching. And actually, what I saw when I went there was that actually maths was being taught really superbly well. There wasn't anything that I saw in how they were teaching maths that I didn't know was really good maths teaching, because it complied with what maths education researchers have been saying for a long time, and including some from China that have been building on this. But the big thing about it was that they were actually doing it and doing it at scale. And the way they were able to do that was because of their structures they had around teachers, teacher education, teachers learning together on their job when they were actually practicing teachers, but continually learning, continually improving. And I felt that lots of things about the Chinese system, the culture is different. We can't just kind of transport that back to England and say we want to do exactly the same thing in England as they're doing here. But that idea that if you get the systems right around professional development of teachers, you get the collaboration right in terms of the style of working, and you teach maths deeply for deep understanding, then you can get fantastic results. I came away with that and thought, wow, this is there's real potential here. And the thing that worried me about going back in November, I mean, we had at that time we had a relatively new government who were very keen on education. They'd been shocked by Shanghai doing so well in PISA. They were worried about economics. Essentially, they were thinking that you know we're an old economy. You know, are we going to be able to survive in the sort of cutthroat future of technology and all those things? And you know, our education system, maths education in particular, needs to be better. So let's find out what they're doing. And so I think in a sense I was able to take advantage of the kind of political imperative to try to make maths education better. When I saw they were doing something, I thought, actually, I really think that's a great thing that they're doing, and we can adapt that and make that work in England. Then we definitely should do that. So when we went back to Shanghai in autumn of that year, the worry I had is that my kind of real expertise in maths education is right at the top end of secondary school and high school. You know, just the transition between school and university, and I've done a lot of work with very high-attaining students, that kind of thing. And so I was worried that I'd been very impressed with the primary school teaching, but I thought, well, I'm not a primary expert. So when my director for primary mathematics from the National Centre for Excellence Teaching Mathematics, when she goes there, what will she say? Thankfully, she said, this is fantastic, we can do this. But that was a bit of a gamble.
So then the exchange,
yes.
Talk to us how that worked. So it's teachers from the UK went to Shanghai and vice versa?
That's right. So what happened is that teachers from the UK went out to Shanghai. Let's say it's roughly 70 both ways. So we take 70 teachers out to Shanghai. And out in Shanghai, obviously our teachers can't speak any kind of Chinese language. So they go out to Shanghai. They can't take part in lessons directly, but they were able to observe lessons. And they were, again, many of them had the same kind of stereotypes as me about they weren't quite sure what to expect, and they were blown away by what they saw. But they also felt, that this is something that it's almost like they almost felt that we needed to have higher expectations of our children. That actually, looking at what's happening here, we can do some of this. But then the truly remarkable thing about the exchange is that the Chinese agreed that they would send some teachers to England. So we went over there the way the exchange evolved is that we would go sort of roughly November each year. This happened for a few years, and then they would come back 2 waves of teachers in the spring term, about 35 each time. They would come back, and their teachers, many of whom had never left Shanghai, would come into schools in England and teach lessons in English to our children. And what was really profound about this, and what really I think made people believe that what we were saying was true, was that when those teachers were teaching children in our schools in England, English children, they were getting fantastic response from those children, and our teachers could see that was something that was they hadn't expected, that the expectations of the Chinese teachers to the level of maths and the level of understanding that the children could cope with were higher than theirs had been, and that was like a turning point, really, that first exchange. And I think it was a very nerve-wracking thing for me, because I thought this is a very high-risk strategy to bring these teachers from the other side of the world to teach in a different language in an entirely different culture. But it proved itself, it worked.
Using the Shanghai approach of teaching math, teachers in China focus on asking their students a series of questions, stimulating them to develop logical deduction during their math lessons. The teacher proceeds with the new concept only when every student has mastered the lesson. You talk about questions that were asked in Shanghai that now are being asked in the UK of students. And I'm going to just rattle through the 3 questions that you pointed out. What's the answer? How did you get it? Why did it work?
Yeah.
And I started thinking about that. And it does create a different pathway in the brain. And it engages and elicits and pulls the students into talk to me about the importance of those questions.
Okay. So what's the answer? That can result in a kind of, and that was typically what the question was in a maths lesson in England. What's the answer? Well done, you got it right. But what's the answer? That can be very superficial, can't it? I mean, it may just be that you remembered something. It may be even as simple as that. Some people might learn all their times table religiously. So if the answer is 5 times 7 and they know it's 35, they'll just say 35. But then say, well, how did you do that? And so they might say, well, I know it's in the 7 times table. I know that 5 times 7 is 35. They might say, well, you might say, well, Bob, how can you be sure? They might say, well, I know 10 times 7 is 70, so 5 times 7 is going to be half of that. So you're thinking more deeply about things. And then the next question might be, why did it work as well? I mean, just a simple question like that is it's harder to get the why in. But it's really encouraging. It encourages a deeper level of thinking at each stage. And one of the things that's again, so something that I saw a lot in England is that teachers they'd be asked for evidence of children's progress, and they would take photographs of children's books and like put them in a little file to say, this is evidence that this child has done this. And I couldn't believe how much time was being spent doing these kind of things. And I said, well, the outcome of a good maths lesson is what's happening inside the child's head. That's what you need. And it's that deep thinking. It's engaging the children in thinking deeply about things that helps them to be able to learn. And if they're just operating on a superficial level in the lesson, they're not really thinking. They're just kind of, hopefully keeping the teacher off their back by giving an answer occasionally or hoping they don't get picked on, then they're not learning in the same way. And also, they're less engaged. I mean, if you really engage children in wanting to understand things, they are absolutely captured by that, that they want to do it. So it's, you just got to get that ethos right in your classroom.
Research shows that teachers who collaborate with each other gain higher teaching confidence and feel less isolated. It's also linked to better student achievement. One of the other things you talked about that you witnessed in Shanghai that I found very interesting is that you look at a classroom dynamic. There's a teacher in the front of the classroom and there's students in the class, and the teacher's imparting knowledge and the students are absorbing it. And yet in this dynamic, there's also teachers in there kind of watching, and the teachers can learn from other teachers. And can you talk about the importance of that dynamic and that, you're constantly trying to improve your game? Yeah, okay. So one of the things that used to be the case in education in England is that, if you had another adult in your classroom, it was probably because somebody complained about you. What's going wrong? Well, you'll be assessed in some way. What happens in Shanghai is that, and it happens in Japan, it happens in Singapore, it happens in many Far Eastern jurisdictions, is that it's just part of the job that you're watching your colleagues teach and they're watching you teach. And then you're discussing that and thinking about what worked well and what didn't, and what might be improved in the future. So there's a kind of process of just continual sort of refinement and improvement going on, and it's part of the endeavour of getting better at teaching. And I think that I think it's like any skill, isn't it? I mean, if you want to become a fantastic sports person or whatever, then watching videos and things like that is of yourself and of others is really important, isn't it? And of asking advice from other experts and from your peers. That's just how you get better at stuff. And we in teaching, we just had not been doing that. It's so obvious, but we weren't doing it. But in the Far East, they do it, and we've started to do that now in England, and it it seems to be paying dividends. I mean, we're not, I wouldn't like people to think that we've solved all the problems. We've got a very long way to go, but I think that we are in a position where, as I showed you from some numbers today, there's early indications that this really is working in terms of data as well. You're here for the Forum of World Education event, and last night at a dinner, one of the people who's sponsoring this, who lives here in the United States, was like, we got to get Shanghai math. I mean, she's pointing to what you're doing, but it's not easy, is it? I mean, did you run up against some obstacles along the way? And is it something that the United States, that school districts here could be also doing? Okay, well, I think one of the things that I was saying in my talk earlier is that one of the things that happened, a very serendipitous thing, is that we'd already started thinking about the idea of maths hubs. And the maths hub is kind of like a structure where across England now we've got 40 maths hubs, and they are networks of schools working together very, very, very closely. And so, so there's a lead school that kind of organises what goes on, but we have trained teachers who provide professional development in their own school and across other schools as well. And so I think that we developed a pedagogy based on partly based on what we've seen in Shanghai and partly based on international research about how children learn mathematics and how to get a good sort of system of pedagogy. But we also needed a kind of a vehicle to be able to implement that pedagogy. And so through the maths hubs, the NCTM and the organisation I lead, we're able to provide training for people who become like local leaders of maths education. They are working in the classroom for most of their time, but maybe 20 or 30 days a year. They're providing professional development for teachers in other schools, and that kind of structure can work really well. And I was thinking about, I know that I'm no expert on the American education system, but I know that it's very diverse and not very consistent. And I was thinking, well, perhaps the starting point is to try and make that happen in a state or a few states, and then see how that can develop. But I think that the idea of because of the way our systems are organised in England, we are able to influence what happens. In theory, we can influence what happens in every school in England.
And I know that the States is a bit more complicated than that.
Did you run into any resistance though when you first came back and wanted?
I think there was resistance. I mean, some of the big things were around the cultural differences. British children just aren't like that. Chinese children are more. Their culture is more compliant. They're all of those things, and also the stereotypes that I admitted I had when I first went of expecting it to be kind of rote learning and drilling and all those things, but it really isn't that. But there's a kind of misconception that's what it would be. And so gradually we've been overcoming those misconceptions, but I think that that has taken time. And I think that there's also, I mean, if you're asked to kind of reevaluate what you do and maybe change it quite drastically, there's a natural tendency, isn't there? And quite rightly, you'd want to question that and say, I'm not sure if I believe that. You've got to be really convincing. And one of the things I say is very notable is that primary schools and primary teachers have been much more ready to take the advice and change what they do, partly because they don't feel that they're experts in what they do already. I mean, many primary school teachers are quite nervous about teaching maths, whereas in secondary schools, the teachers that are teaching maths tend to be more expert and tend to feel that this is something they really know about. And so we've got to really win the argument to get them to change their practice, and rightly so. But I think that over time, that is happening.
And by winning the argument, do you find that they find it more rewarding connecting with students in a deeper way?
Oh, definitely. I think that one of the things about, if you find any teacher who's really committed to it, really enjoys their work. I mean, you wouldn't do it if you didn't. And I think that that teaching in this way is really very, very rewarding. It's great to see students have light bulb moments when suddenly things make sense to them. That's what's going on there. That's the holy grail of teaching, and teaching in this way enables that to happen much more frequently.
So interesting you say that, because I was an adjunct professor for a time, and I remember going in and not connecting with my students at all for like 2 or 3 sessions, and I'm like, this is awful. And then going and having that light bulb moment, and my wife was a teacher, and I remember coming home and saying, oh my God, this is like crack cocaine. It's so fantastic.
Exactly.
And thinking about teaching maths and having students just sitting there, but then all of a sudden having that light bulb moment in the classroom is probably got to be fantastic. I know you spent time in the classroom before you transitioned to this. Do you think back to your teaching days and kind of wish, geez, I wish I'd spent some time in Shanghai before I was doing what I did?
Definitely. There are things that I would have done differently and done better. I think that I always had this idea that you should be teaching for understanding. I think that just teaching people like algorithms and rules for doing things is it's just that's just wrong. I mean, that is misrepresenting mathematics in my view. But lots of the deeper sort of well-researched techniques involved in teaching mastery about how you represent mathematical structures, how you can ask really, really clever questions to build people's understanding by asking the right questions at the right time. All of those things I knew nothing about. And if I could transform myself back 30 years now with the knowledge I now have, I think I'd be a much better teacher than I was.
So we're not going to make you go back in time. We'll make you stay here in the present. But also talk about the future, the importance of math, especially with the way the world's changing dramatically. Math is becoming more and more important, isn't it? And so connecting with those students and making them proficient is enormously important.
I think that's enormously important. It's also enormously important with older students for them to understand how useful maths is and how valuable it can be. And a real skill for somebody in modern society who's using mathematics isn't being able to sort of turn the handle and do the sums. It's being able to ask the technology the right questions to be able to turn a problem in the real world into to mathematize the problem in a way that then makes it tractable for technology to help to solve it.
Let me ask one final question. We evolve, technology evolves. We're living in a world that continues to evolve. Do you feel like, as you look at maths, and it's obviously a passion of yours, does it always have to continue to evolve, or do you think the Shanghai method's a silver bullet, or it's just something you can build on? And are you constantly always out there looking for what's the next best thing to help?
I think we should always believe what's the next best thing to help. There's no room for complacency in anything because everything is changing so much. So I think, for example, I think artificial intelligence, I mean, even without completely revolutionizing maths teaching, which I wouldn't know how to do yet, but even just thinking about things that happen around, I don't know, teachers, especially teachers in the West, spend huge amounts of time in the classroom teaching. They've got very limited time outside the classroom to lesson preparation and things. A lot of that time they spend marking, for example. I've seen AI tools where the teacher marks a few scripts, the AI learns what the teacher is looking for, and then the AI gets on with the marking. Those kinds of things can be profound. There are also things like children that are stuck with their maths homework. That can be really deeply frustrating for a young person. You can get AI tools that can help them with that. So those kinds of things are definitely going to be a big help. In terms of how children learn mathematics, I think that we need to learn more about that all the time. I think we need to take a scientific approach to how we to teaching and learning.
Charlie, thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you.